Hello there, wonderful humans. Welcome aboard the Tabletop Express. My name is Anthony, and this is Creators Corner, a first for me hosting solo. And what better guest to have than Miss Connie Vogelmann, designer of Apiary. Connie, thank you so much for joining me this evening, all the way from Washington.
Washington D.C. But yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm happy to talk about apiary. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it too. When Chris first sent me the email with the info about the game, I just looked at the cover and I was like, "Yep, I'll do this one." It's apiary, unofficial subtitle is bees in space. That's just I had to
Absolutely.
do that.
Yeah, 100%.
So this is your first design, right? Which is
Yes.
something that I'm always interested in talking to people about how they took that plunge. But before we get into the game specifics, I do have to honor, the tradition that Chris does when he does these interviews, which is he would love to know your board game origin story. How did you fall down this rabbit hole of ours? How did it all start?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up playing a fair number of games, I think, like a lot of people. My family played a lot of Pinochle. That was the big family get together event, which I know is a little bit unusual, but everyone got really into bidding and passing cards and all of that kind of stuff. I also played a lot of cribbage growing up. And we kind of had the general smattering of, Monopoly and stuff like that as well.
Sure.
And then once I got into high school and college, I kind of just dropped it, as one does at that age. And then when I was in law school, actually, I had a friend come up to me and say, "Hey, do you want to come over for dinner and a board game?" And I was like, "How old are we? Like, what are we doing?" And he's like, "No, no, no, Connie. I promise you will love this game." And that game was Settlers of Catan. I think for so many of us, it just got so many of us into the hobby. And I think from there, I was just absolutely hooked. I mean, it was just like a switch flipped. And then so I started a board game club at my law school, got really into it. We played the same 5 or 6 games over and over and over again because none of us had any collection and we were just getting into the hobby. And then after
Sure.
law school, I moved to Washington D.C. and just started kind of joining a lot of meetup groups and stuff to just get to know people. And then that was when it just really rocketed to the next level because at that point, my whole social network was board games. And so it really kind of took off from there. And that was almost 10 years ago at this point. So I've been very in the hobby for a very long time at this point.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. And yes, you're right. That is there is a very similar theme with that entryway stuff. Catan certainly is one of them. I think Ticket to Ride for a lot of folks as well, and Pandemic, which was mine personally, which I think is a lot of people's also. So when you say that you guys had the same kind of 5 or 6 games in a rotation besides Catan, what were you folks getting into the
Yeah.
table at that time?
Yep. So a couple of the ones that you mentioned. So we had Pandemic, we had Ticket to Ride, we had Carcassonne, we had a copy of Puerto Rico, we had Small World. I played a lot of Small World. I really, really enjoyed that game for a very, very long time. And then I think the last one we had was Power Grid. So that was starting
Oh,
to
okay.
get, a little bit, both Puerto Rico and Power Grid are starting to get a little bit heavier. And then I think ultimately we added a copy of Agricola as well. But yeah, so it was a lot of those, again, a lot of the kind of big hits of gateway games. I mean, that was sort of,
Yeah.
again, how we got into the hobby.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up Small World because that'll be many people's first experience with a couple of things, right? That don't happen in a lot of other games. You're going to have these different factions that play differently, which is a pretty
Yep.
unique thing at the time. You're also going to be, sort of dying or being eliminated during the game, only to sort of reemerge as some other sort of combination of race and stuff. And so, your game Apiary has, if I'm not mistaken, 20 different factions.
It does, yeah. And it also has a concept of dying and being reborn again. Although I will say that until just this moment, I've never actually made the connection with Small World, but that's actually pretty funny. But
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
and just a quick pitch on Small World. I know that it's, I don't know how much folks play it anymore, but yeah, just that kind of concept of you have this civilization and you can get completely wiped off the map, and that's okay. You just start over again, and sort of figuring
Yep.
out when you're going to take that action and when you're going to restart. It's such a fascinating decision. Like, as I said, I just have such fond memories. I played that game so much back in the day.
Yeah, no, it's great. And man, it certainly had legs. There's been more expansions than I can count for that game for sure. And a very have you ever seen the like Uber Deluxe giant chest
No.
version of that. It's kind of crazy. But so I do want to say then that we have a couple people in the chat real quick. Hi, Rachel. So Rachel's asking how the factions may have gotten their names in Apiary.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, there's 20 factions in Apiary. They all play a little bit differently. The factions actually came from real life honeybee names. So there are, oh gosh, several dozen scientifically recognized subspecies of honeybees in the world. And so most of the factions, 19 of the 20 factions in Apiary, are shortened versions of those subspecies. So that's why they sound a little bit gibberishy, is because in some ways they are. And to the extent that I could, not that I think anyone's going to be able to recreate it at this point, but to the extent that I could, I tried to match the faction ability with something that was a little bit unique or special about that particular subspecies of honeybee. I just have to make a quick shout out. The last faction, the 20th faction, is called Visah, Visah. And that is actually, this is a super nerdy beekeeper thing, but that's actually my own personal play on VSH bees, which are basically being bred to be, it's Varroa sensitive hygienic, I believe, but basically protect against Varroa mites, which are really demolishing honeybee colonies. And so that was sort of my like little play on, well, it's not a subspecies now, but maybe it could be one day in the future. So very nerdy beekeeping. I see Josh Ward comment via VSH.
Josh Ward is in your nerd realm there. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, it's, it's crazy. I feel like many other things that we sort of discover, no matter how old you are, there's always another discovery that you're making about something, whether it's a hobby or just general knowledge. And I've talked about this before with other folks. There's such a connection between the world of science, really, as a very broad spectrum, and board games, right? And I can't help but think about a designer like Elizabeth Hargrave, who I'm sure you've heard of, who obviously has that nature theme like in abundance in her games. So was there a point for you where you wanted to just make a game, or was it more of the bee and nature influence that came first? Like how did those two come together for you personally?
Yeah, so they actually basically clicked together, which is interesting because I would definitely identify myself as a mechanism first game designer. I mean, I'm definitely sort of thinking about how you get different systems to interact. But I will say that in the case of Apiary, I was having a conversation with a few friends. We were talking about getting new workers and worker placement games and how it's often a less interesting decision than maybe you want it to be. I mean, there's an awful lot of games where I think there's a fairly, especially kind of older games, where there's a fairly established, like you get one additional worker or you get two additional workers and then you stop and then you're done. And so we were sort of talking about how what should be such an interesting decision ends up being a little bit kind of one note or very binary. And so I was sort of thinking about this concept of like, what if you had workers that aged and died? And at that time, we'd played Village, and Village does that to an extent, but it's a little bit different. And then at the same time, I had been getting into beekeeping, sort of doing some preliminary research to start keeping bees myself. And so I think bees were very kind of at the forefront of my mind, and just from that very first conversation, it just clicked. And it was like, oh my gosh, you could do this with bees so well. Because if you think about kind of a queen bee and you think about the beehive as a whole, those workers are very disposable. They only live for a few weeks most of the time, and they're constantly coming in and out. They're all kind of acting for the good of the hive. And so it kind of clicked right away on that. But I will say that, as much as it did get moved to space and it does have a very, I think, strong sci-fi element at this point, the game was and is very grounded in, bees and honeybees and how they, exist and everything.
Yeah, it's a fascinating theme, and it's something else that I feel like just a few years ago, all of a sudden, like you said, was at the forefront about how important these insects are to our world, really, right? And then all of a sudden, some high profile folks started speaking out about doing stuff to conserve and how to do hive and all that stuff. And you see a lot of folks locally who are keeping bees and actually selling honey, like in their driveway. I mean, I bought it a couple weeks ago from a local folks. So yeah, that's a great theme. So how did it go? What made it take the leap into this multi-faction space setting as opposed to just like the regular like setting of like nature, like bees in a hive?
Right, absolutely. So I had the faction abilities actually in the game fairly early on. That's something that I really like in games. I really like variable player powers, really increases, how often you can play a game. It sends you in a different direction, etc. I absolutely love player powers in games. So I wanted to have those from the beginning. And I did from a fairly early, as soon as I kind of got the core loop of the game established, I added those in. The move to space, though, actually happened very late in the process. So I took the game to Stonemeyer's Design Day in 2021. And at that point in time, it was just regular bees. The game was still called Apiary, but it was set in the real world. You are bees, your faction abilities, your queen bee, you're building out a hive, and so on. And I got to talking with Jamie Stegmaier a little bit after Design Day, and we were sort of going back and forth. And he said, "Look, I think this game is interesting. You've got some cool stuff going on. However, I'm really worried. There's this wonderful mid-weight worker placement Euro game about bees called Honey Buzz that just came out and has been doing really well. I'm very worried that this is in the same space. Would you ever consider changing the theme a little bit, moving it into outer space?" And I said, absolutely. I'm a huge science fiction buff. Honestly, it was really exciting to me. And it actually solved a few design problems too. Again, even your faction abilities, frankly, they work a lot better when they're sentient, spacefaring bees than they do when they're kind of, your backyard honeybees, and you're recruiting other kind of ambassador bees to join your hive and stuff. And so there's a lot of things like that that actually just work a lot better with the science fiction theme. So that's how the game, as I said, got moved from something that was at least quasi grounded in science to something very much in the science fiction space.
Oh, it's great that you have a combination of both of those things. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So obviously you mentioned, working with Jamie. Jamie is definitely a friend of the channel. He's been on before and just an all around good human. So can you explain a little bit more about how it was like working within the house of Stegmaier, to, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a really positive experience from start to finish. You hear a lot of horror stories from designers about, frankly, publishers who either take the game and run with it and it comes back to them completely different, or they'll hear nothing and drop it. Or, the other thing I've heard is the publisher will just kind of leave it be to them to do all the work, et cetera. Anyway, not like that at Stonemaier at all. I think for me, this was about a perfect amount of interaction. So basically what would happen is, I'd send the game to Jamie. Jamie would play test it, give me some fairly extensive feedback. We kind of go back and forth on it. All kind of via really long, big email chains, well, I agree with you on this point. I don't agree on this point. What if we did this, And then we'd get to kind of a point where I think we could both really live with it. And then it would get sent out for a wave of blind play testing. And one of the wonderful things about Stonemaier is they have an absolutely wonderful network of blind play testers who, basically will play the game several times and then send it back with very extensive feedback. And then once every time they sent it back, what would happen is they would write up some reports. Jamie would summarize the reports, kind of pull out the things that he thought were the most important. Then he would, send me everything, his thoughts, all of the reports, etc. And then we'd go back and forth again. And then we kind of did that 5 or 6 times with 5 or 6 different waves of playtesting to really kind of refine from something, bigger picture changes, sort of smaller. And so it was very, very collaborative from start to finish. Obviously as the publisher, he had the final say on everything, but I will say, to give him an awful lot of credit, I was a completely unknown game designer, brand new game designer, and gave me a lot of kind of respect and ability to really kind of talk through a lot of these issues. And that was absolutely truly a wonderful experience.
That's awesome to hear. That's not surprising to hear, but it's great. So we have a couple comments here in the chat. I want to make sure that people are heard here. So yes, Lionel points out that in Stone Age, got to get that love shack early and then just make more people. But as soon as you're born, you go and start collecting, cutting down trees and stuff. It's a rough life there.
At the risk of just a total non sequitur here, I don't know if anyone's ever played the old Stone Age app, but there's an old app for, Android, and I don't remember what device it was even on, but I think my favorite thing about that app was all your workers were these big burly dudes with 2 beards. And these 2 big burly dudes with beards would go into the love shack, and then 3 big dudes with burly beards, or, big burly with your team out. And I just thought it was the funniest thing in the world. It's like, you know, there's just something about like there's three of them and they've got these big bushy beards. And anyway, at the risk of just total tangent.
Totally worth it. Rachel points out, and I guess this is a big one here. I mean, the hex shape and bees, what a marriage, right? I mean, the board games and the hex and the bees. What else do you need?
Of course. Of course. Well, and one of the earlier things that I really wanted to incorporate in Apiary as well, I mean, you know, the core was obviously the workers, but, you know, I really like the tableau building element and getting some kind of adjacencies. You know, one of the games that I really liked the tableau building on is Glass Road, one of, I think, UA Rosenberg's more underrated games. I absolutely love that game. I don't know why it doesn't get more attention than it does, but it has some really great tableau building elements where you're doing things with adjacencies. That one's obviously on it's a square grid though, and so by opening it up to hexes, all of a sudden you can get some more of those kind of adjacencies and things like that really play out, I think, very well in the game. And as Rachel said, it's a perfect fit with bees and beekeeping, and then also, you know, hexagons are the best hexagons. I don't know what to say.
Oh, they are. They're such a nice shape. I need a hex like bee t-shirt kind of thing. I gotta look out for one of those. All right. Garrett is asking, was nectar ever considered as a resource in an earlier iteration of Apiary?
It was, yeah. I had pollen and nectar. I'm trying to remember. I had a third base resource, and now I'm actually blanking on what it was. I can't remember if it was water. It might have been water at the time too, because bees obviously use a fair bit of water. Actually, sort of side note, at the risk of going on another tangent, one of my favorite things about bees is that they actually use water as an air conditioner. And so where I keep bees in DC, it's obviously a pretty dense community. And so the beekeeping regulations actually require you to have a water source on the property so that your bees basically don't go bug your neighbor's pool or whatever. And one of the reasons for that is they can actually go through, I don't know, a couple of gallons of water a day in the summer, and they basically bring it back and they fan it through the hive. It's sort of an air conditioning. Anyway, total tangent, but yes, to answer the original question, nectar was one of the original resources before it got moved to space. And then we swapped in fiber, sort of with this idea that they were building some kind of biologic spaceships. I mean, somehow taking the plant matter and refining it and turning it into something that had a little bit more of a stable structure. So that's where the fiber came from in the final game.
Tangents are good. I love tangents because they take up time and they make the conversation move. So tangent all you want. In fact, you reminded me of something. So I used to teach primary school, second grade, and very often we would use the Scholastic News, you know, weekly kind of newsletter thing. And there was always nature stuff. And there was one about bees, a story where they had gotten into, I guess, like the dumpsters of maybe a candy factory. I don't know if it was like M&Ms or Skittles or something. And eventually they produced like multicolored honey.
Really? Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I've actually never heard of anything quite like that. But I will say that if you get, you know, you can get these kind of monoculture honeys, you know, where basically they'll put a beehive in the middle of a single field. And so they'll say it's, you know, 100% clover honey or buckwheat honey or something like that. And the color gradation that you can get from those different types of honey is absolutely stunning. I mean, your palest honeys will be almost white. Your darkest will be almost black, and absolutely everything in between. And that's purely just based on what they're harvesting.
Yes, Josh knows what I was talking about with M&Ms. Yeah, I thought so. And yeah, that's right. They made blue honey. That's what it was. Yeah,
wow, that sounds disconcerting.
Yes. Well, it can't be worse than, what did they make? Like green ketchup or something one time a few years back? Oh, some weird ketchup color was no bueno. So you also have, there's a solo mode. Is that correct?
Yes, there is. Yep.
Yeah, we have a lot of solo gamers in our Discord community and part of the channel as well. So can you talk a little bit about what the solo gameplay looks like for Apiary?
So I will admit that I can't talk. I still have not played the solo mode yet, which is absolutely egregious of me. I got my copy a couple weeks ago, and as you might not be surprised to know, we've had a lot of folks who've wanted to play with us, but I've been really meaning to get the solo mode out. But what I have heard about it is basically a single deck of cards. And what it does is it tells you basically flip two cards over together, and then one side will tell you sort of part of the adjudication of the action, and one will tell you, you know, the other. And what the Atoma Factory always does, I think their solo modes are really, really excellent, is they sort of do a really good job, I think, of simulating what another player would feel like without going through all of the steps of actually adjudicating what that other player would do. And so, as I said, I've heard very good things about it. I still haven't had a chance to actually play it yet, but it's high on my list of things to do.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. How exciting was it for you to get to like open the first copy of this game? Can you describe that?
It was honestly just completely surreal. I mean, it was just a truly bizarre experience, because I mean, first of all, the art is absolutely beautiful. I mean, Kwanchai Moria just did an absolutely fantastic job. I mean, it came out better than I could have ever imagined. The colors are bright and vibrant. And it's just weird that it was this thing that I had created. And, I also spent years staring at the gross, ugly prototype version of it that I had created. And so I had sort of gotten very used to that. So it was just very disconcerting to see it. I mean, disconcerting has a little bit of a negative connotation, and this was much more positive than that. I will say, though, I punched this game more slowly and carefully than any game I have ever punched in my life. It was like one piece at a time. I was like, just
like one piece a day.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't quite that bad. But I will say that too, the little bee miniatures are absolutely stunning too. I mean, they had those custom made, they're 3D, and then they have the numbers on the side. So, as you use them, they age up. And then they actually put a wash on them in the base game as well, because frankly, otherwise it was very hard to see the numbers. And they're just such a really satisfying component to hold. They spin in the direction that's very intuitive, and they're just like a wonderful little component. So, and we had D4 dice throughout all of the prototyping, and these are much better.
Yes, many things are better than D4 dice.
just about anything is better than a D4.
But I agree, it's a stunning looking game, and like you said, the artwork is great. What I love about the artwork, by the way, is that for what it is, bees in space, it has a very realistic look to it, right? Like it's not these cartoony kind of anthropomorphized sort of bees.
Right.
They look pretty legit. So yeah, it is a stunning package here. Rachel agrees. She said it is a beautiful game. Her favorite piece is the big queen bee ship. Do you have a favorite piece?
My favorite piece is probably the little bee miniatures. As I said, they're just so satisfying, and it might honestly just be the contrast of not using a D4 anymore. I'll say too, just to sort of shout out, the resources are also really nice. There's only one version of the game. They didn't do a premium version or anything because, frankly, the only version feels very premium. All the resources are wood. They're all painted, and those are also just really satisfying to use as well. So, but the queen ship is also excellent. So there's a lot of really nice components in the game.
All right, so we're going to take a look at some pictures here. All right, what are we looking at here?
Yeah, so on the left-hand side, you can see a worker placement spot with 2 bees on it. And so Apiary uses a bump mechanism, so no spot is ever blocked. And then the strength of every action is determined by the strength of the bees. So if you have an action spot like that one with 2 bees on it, it tells you basically which column at the top you can buy from. You sum the total of the strength of bees. Then those 3 rows of tiles are 3 of the different types of tiles that you can buy in the game. Every time you buy a tile, you add it to your hive. And then your hive, each hive is different, both in terms of the shape of it, and then also when a lot of the hive spaces have like placement bonuses. So the top row of tiles there are your farm tiles. Those give you storage, they store resources, and they also can provide a source of income. When you retrieve your workers, you can trigger income on your different farms. The middle blue row there are your recruit tiles. Those give you ongoing abilities. And I will say, one of the things that I love about Apiary is a lot of the ongoing abilities are just bonkers. They will just double the strength of an action or something like that. And so everything feels super powerful. And then the bottom row of tiles are actually my favorites. Those are the developments, and those are the one-time benefit tiles. And a lot of them are just incredibly strong. They're just like, reactivate like half of what you've done and things like that. So those are 3 of the 4 types of tiles that you can buy in the game.
Very cool. All right, just your research. Yeah, oh man, these things are so cool. So cool.
Yeah, they're really great. And then the research actually has to do with the cards. And there's this wonderful deck of multi-use cards in the game. And then all of your cards, you can't really see it super well in that picture, but all of your cards can be used for 3 different purposes. You can basically use them for a one-time benefit. You can discard them for a resource, or you can actually tuck them under your mat, which sort of represents the bees doing kind of genetic research and kind of planting seeds.
Okay.
And for endgame scoring. So every time you draw a card, you sort of have that choice of one of the three things that you want to do with it.
Very nice. Very nice. Here's a great shot of all the goodies. Man, that's so cool. So cool.
Yeah, as I said, I mean, the production, I mean, you know, it's pretty well known with Stonemaier, but Stonemaier makes some really beautiful games.
Yeah, no, you're in good hands there for sure.
Yeah,
so I have to wonder, with 20 factions,
yes,
is there any room for, say, extra factions someday?
Yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest, you could probably make factions with this game until the end of time. There are just so many different levers that you can pull, and I will say too that a lot of the factions are certainly smaller than some of the factions that you'll see in other games. You know, 5 of the factions are just actually were added fairly late in the process. They were Jamie's idea, and his comment, and I think was a very good one, was that some of the advanced factions are a little distracting. They'll almost send you down in the wrong path, or you'll have this ability and you'll try to use it every turn, and it's not really in your best interest to do. And so one of the things with Apiary is it can be a little bit hard to get a sense for the flow of the game. You know, it's not a set number of rounds. The game ends after a certain number of bees have hibernated. Bees hibernate when they go from a strength 1 to a 2 to a 3 to a 4, and then when they would age beyond that, they hibernate. But there's a lot of ways in the game to manipulate that, so it can be a little bit hard to get a sense of the flow and how long the game's going to last. And so we actually added 5 starter factions fairly late in the process that just give you a very minor end game scoring, and that's it. And so the other 15 or so factions are sort of the advanced factions, and those are the original ones.
Oh, okay.
One of the big things, though, is you know, every faction, every time you have a faction, you pair it with a hive mat, and your hive mat is essentially, if you think of Ark Nova or something like that, is sort of the spaces that you're building on, and each of the hive mats are different. And we only have 5 hive mats in the base game, and that's actually one of the things that I would really love to expand, is to actually build out more of those hive mats. You have more permutations and combinations and different patterns to build in.
Yeah, so that adds even more variability to the setup. That's great.
Yep, absolutely.
Sorry, Josh is asking, in your plays, how often do those cards get discarded for that single resource?
So it's niche. I would say it also depends on the strategy that you're doing, because sometimes you're not going to interact with the cards very much at all. In some games, like I played a game a couple of nights ago where I probably had 15 cards over the course of the game, and I probably discarded 2 or 3 of them for resources. One of the sneaky good things about the cards, and one of the reasons why you might actually on occasion use them for resources, is you don't have to store them. So everything in Apiary, you can only store a resource if you have a place to store that resource. If you have it, so you just have the cards in your hand. And so it's kind of a sneaky way to exceed your storage limit. And so that's actually sometimes the time when you would use them for resources. But I would say probably 80 to 90% of the time, you're going to use them for either the instant ability or for the end game ability.
Interesting. Cool.
And I'll mention too,
go ahead.
The other thing I was just going to add is, you know, it was Jamie's idea to add the discard for a resource, I think. And I think it might have been, this is just me speculating, but it might have been inspired by Tapestry, because I think that was a request that they got for the Tapestry cards, is like, could these just be played for a resource? And so I think it might have come from that. But I do like the idea that every time you pick a card up, at worst, it's a resource. And like sometimes it's much, much better than a resource, but it's nice to sort of have that floor.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I just want to thank everyone who's throwing the questions here. If you have them, keep them coming. I was like, oh, I'll ask her some bee trivia questions that I found on like Nat Geo for Kids, and then the first 2 minutes into the interview, I was like, no, scratch that. So.
Well, this might be embarrassing, right? I call myself a beekeeper, and then I'll get thrown by the trivia. You know, it's like that TV show, the Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? And you're like, oh no, I'm not. I haven't thought about that in a long time.
That's great. So what other I'm only assuming that as a now designer that you have other ideas floating around inside that hive of yours. So without giving too much away, is there anything else that you feel that you can revisit more easily now that you've gone through the whole process? Are there some ideas that you're like, well, that's definitely not going to work now that I know X, Y, and Z?
Well, so I'll say that I've been spending a lot of time working on a couple projects that I can't talk about, unfortunately. And I will say that with those projects, design, like anything, is a skill that you can get better at. And it's not necessarily that the underlying idea is better, but you can iterate a lot more quickly, cut out all of the fluff. And some of that's designing, or some of that's prototyping, just figuring out how to use some of the design programs and figuring out how to get through a prototype more quickly. And then some of it is realizing, well, I realized in this last game this didn't work. Let's assume it might not work here as well. I will say though that I have a game that's been on the back burner for a little while that I'm really excited to get back to, and I'm calling it a roll and move. But every time I've called it a roll and move, people are like, "Don't do that because it's not a roll and move. It's so much more fun than a roll and move." But that's a turtle migration themed game, and so the idea is you have these little hatchlings, and they hatch, and then they automatically run toward the water, and you have to try to like help them get to the water, and then you're sort of you roll a set of dice. I'm back to D4s somehow with that one, which rolling D4s is awful. But your dice allow you to do different actions at different strength, one of which is moving.
Okay.
But that one's been on the back burner for a little while. As I said, I've been working on a couple of projects that unfortunately I can't talk about. But yeah, you definitely get better at design. It definitely gets a lot more efficient, let's say, as you do it a little bit more.
It's a hatch and move. Hatch and move.
Ooh, I like that.
You heard it here first, folks. Hatch and move. Next up, coming from Connie. All right. So, what else besides designing board games and doing all the stuff with the bees? So, you went to law school. You're a practicing lawyer as well.
Yeah. So I work for the government. I am an attorney by trade. I do grants law. It's boring. Or at least I would say it's boring to most people, but it is one of those things that you can really feel good about yourself at the end of the day. We're working with lots of big dollar amounts. Right now I'm working on a lot of programs to get internet access to folks who don't have access to it. So it's a good, it's a good thing to do. To be perfectly honest, these days, probably, the vast majority of my waking hours are work, board game design, or playing games, or otherwise trying to stay up with the industry. I obviously do the beekeeping on the side, and a lot of my other hobbies have fallen off a little bit because there's just only so many hours in the day.
Yeah, I've heard that. I think, Rachel has the idea: a pop-o-matic in a turtle shell shape.
Oh.
That way, you put the D4 inside. Nobody has to touch the D4. Nobody will step on the D4, and it just enclosed, in the turtle shell.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Question from Donald says, were there any mechanics that you would have liked to use, but that you just couldn't really fit, either because of the theme or because of, again, it's so interesting to hear the things that you're saying that Jamie said, because obviously he has been down this road several times, right? And the fact that you said only very late in the game, after he already said, hey, let's move it to space, let's also make these other factions that play a little bit easier. Were there any other things that sort of didn't fit, I guess, along the lines of Donald's question here?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. There was one in particular that I really wanted to make work and it just didn't. And that was a x-axis, y-axis grid movement of how you explored the planets. And this goes back to, I think this was actually the version that I submitted for consideration. And this actually predates the space theme. But what I really wanted to do was have two different action spaces, and one controlled your y-axis and one controlled your x-axis. And then basically the two Bs on the two spots controlled which space you could get to. And I really liked the concept of it because it was an interesting spatial puzzle. It was something that I hadn't seen in other games before, and it just didn't work. Ultimately, what ended up happening is as soon as one worker got on one of the spots, then that becomes either the column or the row that you can access. And so it ended up being just very frustrating because it's, to a certain extent, gathering resources is maybe not supposed to be one of your most difficult parts of the game. You want to make you want to give people the access to the resources to actually then let them play the rest of the game. And so that was a little bit too restrictive. One thing it's kind of the flip side of that question though, is we actually added a couple of really cool mechanisms during development that I thought really helped the game shine. And some of those actually really directly tie into the space theme. So one of them, for instance, we added dances which are new conversions that you can create over the course of the game. And so there are some tiles that come with the game. They're kind of these rectangular tiles. And then one of the things that you can do when you place a strength 4 worker on that space is you can actually create your own conversion for the rest of the game. And anytime somebody uses your conversion, you get some kind of a benefit for it. And that sort of is a play off of Bee's waggle dances, kind of taken to the extreme of like, okay, what if this dancing bee really became part of their culture? And so kind of hand in hand with that, one of the cool things that I think we added fairly late was that each space has a special ability when you place a strength 4 worker there, and you want all of them, and you do not have enough strength 4s to actually activate all of them. So for instance, one of the spaces allows you to plant those seed cards that I talked about before. One of them lets you create those dances. One of them actually lets you flip your faction tile over. All of the factions are double-sided, so there's a base side and there's an upgraded side. So when you go to that space, you can upgrade it and get like a special power. So there's some really cool abilities, and you want to do all of them.
That's awesome. That's very cool. Is there anything else in terms of the process that you were surprised by or caught off guard by, or something you didn't expect that you would have to do, or just anything like out of the ordinary? Did you know enough about being in the hobby already to kind of feel your way through?
I knew enough to know that the experience that I was having was very different from a lot of game designers in a much more positive way.
Okay.
One of the things that I was really lucky. I ran into Elizabeth Hargrave several years ago. She has a local game designer group. There's a lot of really great local designers in DC, and so I was sort of in that group and kind of hearing horror stories about working with different publishers. And so this was very much positive, and it exceeded my wildest dreams. The other thing, though, is just to sort of flag is you don't really realize how much work goes into these games. And I think you might realize it kind of from a design perspective, but just, all of the proofreaders and the play testers and the graphic designers and, the art. And it's just every single step is so complicated, and there's just so much there that I think you sort of don't realize every time you proof the files just how much, if you look at one single tile, how many pieces there are to get right on that one single tile, and then you multiply that by 100 and something tiles and the 20 factions and the 5 hive mats, and I think there's like 75 seed cards and so on and so forth, and it just et cetera, et cetera. So I think that was probably the biggest thing that kind of surprised me a little bit.
Yeah. Well, listen, you jumped in with a pretty hefty game on your first go. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on. So
Yeah,
it'd be okay for you to step back and do the hatch and move thing as a little bit of a, your sophomore album, so to speak, and then you can get right back into the heavy stuff after that.
I was just gonna say, I do hear advice a lot from designers to say, like, start small, start with an 18 card game, enter the button shy competitions, things like that. And I think there's a lot of merit to that. But at the same time, I also think, you have to be really dedicated to the project. You might be with it for years. Let me put it this way, if everything goes perfectly and it exceeds your wildest expectation, the game will be with you for years. Like, the best possible scenario is, you either find a publisher or you do a Kickstarter. And so several years later, you're still working on it. So it has to be something that you're really interested in and that you can play 100 times and still enjoy that game. And so I do think there's some merit in designing to what you know.
Sure. Yes, I agree, Chris. Go all the way, follow your heart. What's the worst that could happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I do think that, yeah, exactly. And I think there's a lot of merit in designing, even if you don't find a publisher, even if that's not what you want to do. I mean, I would say don't design for the publication, design because you enjoy the process, because it's something you love doing, because you like playtesting, because you like meeting new people, because you like solving problems. I think you have to get a certain amount of enjoyment in the process, so you're probably not going to make it that far.
Yep, for sure. Greetings all the way from the West Coast. Marty tuning in, saying excited for your new game.
Wonderful, thank you.
So speaking of, what is the availability? Where can folks get this or pre-order it, order it? What is the availability right now for Apiary?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's available from Stonemeyer's website right now. I think they have distributions. They have one in the US, one in Canada, one in the UK, and one in Australia, I believe. And so it's available to order from any of those 4 distribution centers. The retail release is November 17th, I believe. So that will be when you can get it at your friendly local game store.
Excellent. So we'll be on the lookout for that. And where can folks, besides obviously the Stonemeyer site, where can folks find more out about you and what you're doing with bees and or board games these days.
Yeah, so I will admit I don't have the biggest online presence in the world. I'm doing my best to be on both X, as I guess we're obliged to call it at this point, and Blue Sky.
You can
And
call it whatever you want.
on both of those platforms, I'm at Connie V DC. So that's where I am trying to be active, but only sometimes being successful.
Yeah, you'll probably be forced into it more now, especially when the game starts to get, in a lot of people's hands for sure.
Right. Well, and I do, there are more. There's getting to be more diversity in game design, and I think that's really wonderful. There are still not as many women as maybe I would like, and so I do think it's really important to try to be a little bit visible, from that standpoint for sort of the next person who comes along and is like, oh, there aren't too many game designers like me. Like, let's, can I do this? And so I do think it's really important from that standpoint, and that's part of the reason I'm trying to kind of push myself out there a little bit. And again, I really believe in the project and the game and all of the people who have put so much time and effort into it. And I think it's a really good product. So as I said, I'm trying to be out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I know at the Tabletop Express, we're definitely looking forward to getting that one out, and I would be shocked if it was not part of a live play at some point. So we definitely have that to look forward to. All right, before we wrap things up here, I'm going to go for it, and you're going to take the fifth grader bee quiz.
Uh-oh. All right, let's do it.
We're going to see what happens. So,
but I mean, if Josh Ward is still around in the chat, I might phone a friend.
All right, let's see if I can do this without messing anything up here. So we're going to share screen, and I'm going to bring up the bee quiz. All right, so this is actually from earthday.org. Okay, so very official source here. All right, here we go. And good news is multiple choice. So
right, I was gonna say it better be.
I think you already answered this question, but about how many different species of bees are there out of these three vastly different numbers?
Vastly. See, and this is the embarrassing thing too, because like those are vastly different, and I should know the answer. I'm gonna go with 2,000. That sounds right to me.
2,000. So let's go for it.
I feel like somebody's probably out. See, somebody's screaming in the chat. Yep.
Oh no. Yeah, somebody is. Who's screaming? Yeah.
Yep. And I will say too, I mean, this is one of these things that, we talk about honeybees a lot, and that's obviously the context for apiary, but there's apparently 25,000 species of non-honeybees out there. And I mean, a lot of those are sort of solitary bees or don't form the traditional colonies that we think of, with honeybees.
Sure. All right, rolling on the question number 2. How much honey can a single honeybee make in its lifetime?
Oh, God. I mean,
1/12 of a teaspoon, a tablespoon, or a jar?
All right, I'm going to go with a 1/12 of a teaspoon. Just because I know that an average beehive, because an average beehive will have around 50 to 80,000 bees, something like that. And so if you can get, so it's got to be a pretty small amount. I mean, not that, the bees are obviously doing a lot of things other than making honeys, but it would have to be pretty small with that kind of number.
Yeah, that is a very small amount. That's kind of crazy. All right. Ooh, I think you're going to know this one. Something tells me you know this one. What do bees get from flowers?
All right, let's go with nectar and pollen.
That one. Come on. All right. That's definitely the...
I mean, hey, I'm almost into passing. I'm almost into like what 75 or 2/3, right? So let's see if we can get into like a passing grade.
All right. So now we're looking at how many pairs of wings does a bee have? Pairs of wings.
I believe it's 2 pairs, isn't it? Well, we're gonna go with 2 and find out. Okay.
4 wings total. All right. Next up. Oh, this is interesting. I did not know this. What color can bees not see?
I think it's red. I'm pretty sure. I think it's red. We're going with red.
Final answer is correct.
All right, wonderful. I do know that they
green, blue, and ultraviolet light, but they cannot distinguish red from black.
I know that they have an overlap. They have a certain amount of overlap, obviously, with our visible spectrum, but I couldn't remember which direction it was off on. So.
Oh, speaking of colors, I do want to point out real quick. I believe your game is colorblind friendly. Yep. I thought I saw that on the website, right? So yeah, we definitely appreciate that at the Express as well. I wanted to point that out.
Yep, absolutely. There's obviously a lot of different types of color blindness, but I know they do their best to run it through as many different filters and check with as many people as they possibly can to try to differentiate all those colors, which is why some of them, there's kind of a grayish off-white that looks like a little bit of an odd color, but it turns out that for a lot of types of color blindness, it's just very distinct from everything else.
Exactly. It stands out. Yep. All right, next up, which of these common insects will eat bees?
Oh.
Beetles, dragonflies, or ladybugs? Definitely not ladybugs.
I would imagine that ladybugs are too small. I'm guessing I'm going to go with beetles. Beetles are such a broad category, though. I don't really know what that means, but let's try it.
That's true.
Wow, dragonflies. Interesting. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I knew dragonflies ate mosquitoes. I didn't know they also ate bees.
Okay, yeah. I guess I've never thought too much about the diet of a dragonfly, but, you learn something new every day.
There you go. Maybe, down the line, dragonfly game, you never know.
Yeah.
Ooh, how many eyes does a bee have? 5, 6, or 8? I don't think I even would have guessed correctly on making the choices for this question.
Right. Well, so I would guess it's an even number. This is where I need to phone a friend. So if anyone in chat has any idea.
All right. So while we're getting that, we got Garrett here saying he's very excited about this game, but he does have a fear of bees. So wear red. We'll maybe help you. Yeah, I guess.
I don't actually know if it helps. I know if you're beekeeping, they always recommend wearing white. Basically wear something that doesn't look like a flower.
Right.
But all right, so I don't see anything coming through in the chat to help me on this one. So I'm going to pick an even number because I'm going to assume that they're symmetrical, and let's go with 8.
Let's go with 8.
That's 5.
5. That's the most bizarre answer. Oh my goodness.
And here I am trying to logic it out. I'm like, well, maybe if they're symmetrical creatures.
3 simple and 2 complex. Well, who knew? So much to know. Yeah, my kid has been watching that cartoon called The Wild Kratts. Do you know what that show is?
Yeah, I'm not familiar.
It's basically these two wildlife exploring brothers that are real life people, but there's a cartoon based on them. They go and get these animal superpowers or whatever. They did this episode about spiders, and apparently spiders make 7 or 8 different kinds of silk that they use for different things. So the one that they use for the main part of the web is different than the one that they use for the spokes, and different from the one that they use to wrap up insects when they catch them.
Interesting. Oh, that's fascinating.
All right, here we go. Moving on. All right, I think you know this one because you mentioned this. How many honeybees could you find in a typical hive?
Definitely up to 60,000.
Yeah.
And I would say I've actually seen numbers that are quite a bit higher than that as well. But
so have you ever been involved with someone who's had a bee problem and they call you to come and get the bees for them?
No, so we do have there's a very active beekeeping squad in DC that basically specifically focuses on that. I have not been a part of those efforts, but they do all kinds of removal, basically, obviously to try to get people their house or their shed or whatever back. It's sort of interesting how you can do it. Basically, you have to find the queen, remove the queen, and then the sort of pheromones from the queen will actually slowly pull the rest of the bees out of whatever space you don't want them to be in. So it's pretty fascinating. But I know the DC group, they all have these bright orange vests, and they'll go in, with their kind of aura of authority. But it's an important service. So
very cool. All right, couple more, I think. Yeah, probably 2 more questions. All right, let's see here. Who are the members of the honeybee colony? 3 queens, a combination of knights. Okay, that's
the last one, the queen workers and drones. Your workers are your female bees. They're basically the ones that do everything. Your male bees are your drones. The drones basically just exist to mate with other queens, and that's basically their purpose. And then they get kicked out in the winter, which is a little bit cruel, but it's a cruel world out there.
Yeah, well, what are you gonna do? Which of these foods are pollinated by bees? Blueberries, plums, almonds, or all of the above?
Oh, this is embarrassing. I should know this. I'm going to assume it's all of the above.
I would assume.
I've taken a lot of government compliance tests, and every time there's an all of the above, that's always what it is. So that's what we're going to go with.
Yep. Blueberries require the greatest number of honeybees. Yeah, well, that makes sense because they're so tiny. All right, so you got 7 out of 10.
All right, not great. I feel like I lost a little bit of credibility there, but at least we got a few of them right.
Hey, look, the game's already made, so that's nobody can do anything about it now. It's over.
Well, another space bees anyway, right? So
That's right. Yeah. All right, so a couple more comments here, and then we will start to wrap things up. Let's see here. Yeah, everybody was guessing at a couple of answers. What makes an eye simple versus complex? I have no idea. Do you know the answer to that?
not off the top of my head. That's from a biology class that I took a very long time ago.
I would
But
assume that has something to do with how
lenses.
yeah, I was just say how the light is perceived. I'm sure would.
Right, because I think like flies, I think of as having the complex eyes, but I don't honestly know what the anatomical, background is.
Lots of love for the Wildcrats. Yeah, I don't mind my child watching that because it is highly educational as well as entertaining, and it's not mindless stuff. Yeah, Wildcrats before Bluey came along. Bluey is slowly gaining some traction in this household. I'm a fan of the show. I find myself sometimes leaving it on when the children are not watching it.
Okay, I mean that's a pretty good compliment.
So yeah, I'm okay with that one too. Let's see what else we got here. What did Ryan say? We're clearly part of the same hive mind. Yeah, there you go. I'm surprised
by the
that
way,
it took so long for the puns to come.
and that is, that of all of the surprising things that have happened with Apiary, the number one might be the bee puns.
Yeah.
I think my favorite was Honey Buzz Aldrin, but we have seen an awful lot of really good bee puns coming out from folks from the last couple months. So keep them coming.
7 out of 10 is a B, right? Yeah, well,
I think it was like a C.
it's not really a C. If you want to make the fun, I guess you can stretch it. So you reminded me real quick when you had said that you had talked to Jamie and he told you about Honey Buzz. Did you play Honey Buzz then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I'd already played it at that point, but I was familiar with it. But it did, it was one of those. I do remember when it came out having this like moment. It was oh my god, someone got there before me. But the games are very, very different. I mean, they both share a worker placement mechanism, and you are building out tiles with both of them, but they're very, very different games. So I think, and my philosophy is that if you can have like 16 trading in the Mediterranean games, you can have like 2 B games, and I think that's okay.
There's a few. I have what game do I have? I have a B game. I have Queens, which is very abstract.
I was gonna say I've not played that one. I know there's bees as well. There's bees, and then there's bees with different numbers of E's.
Lots of E's and Z's everywhere.
Yep.
Excellent. All right. Well, Connie, I do want to thank you for spending almost an hour with me. I had an awesome time. Thank you to everyone who asked questions or just popped in to say hi in the chat. We definitely appreciate it. Give the video a thumbs up either now or later. And please be sure to check out Apiary and check out Connie on all of her soon to be very active social media platforms.
We'll try. Well, again, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Awesome. All right, folks, you have a great night, and we will see you next time. Thank you for coming aboard the Tabletop Express. Goodbye.